Well, hello everyone. I hope you're having a great day today. Welcome to Thursday's edition of Take 5. We are breaking down the message that I preached Sunday that we entitled Simply Unnecessary. And what we're doing, we're talking about the dilemmas and the trials and the troubles and the storms and the junk that we get into in life. That's just unnecessary. Things that we go through that we don't have to. Now, there are some things that are necessary. God requires trials and tests. Faith must be tested. God requires these things. It matures us. It grows us up. It makes us stronger in Him. And so there are things that are necessary, but I'm just telling you, there are many, many things that we go through that are unnecessary, and they happen because we make bad choices. We're stubborn, we're disobedient, or we're partially obedient, or we have a bad attitude, or whatever the case might be. There are just some things that are unnecessary, and the Bible tells us about them, and that's what we're trying to learn so we can avoid those things. Now, we're going to be reading from Acts 27, an event that happened in the life of Paul. An unnecessary storm that he got in. Now, Paul, he endured probably more than any of us ever had. As a matter of fact, it was predicted that everywhere he went, bonds and afflictions were awaiting on him. That was just something. As a matter of fact, there was a devil that constantly buffeted Paul. He prayed that God would remove it, but God said, no. My strength's made perfect in your weakness. I'm not going to do that. You need that to keep you, under control. You need that to keep you at a place where you stay humble and you are thankful for the revelations that you've received from me, and you never become prideful. So that was constantly going on, but there were things in Paul's life that were unnecessary too. One of them was the storm he found himself in Acts 27. Now, we've already learned two things this week that cause us to be in unnecessary storms. One is when we take advice from people who are not Spirit-led. That is never smart. And if you do, make sure you do it with the approval of God by witness of the Holy Spirit in you. That's the only time you should do it. And secondly, when we think the majority is always right and we follow them, sometimes we get into things that are unnecessary. The third one, and that we're going to talk about from Paul's experience there, is acting upon supposition and presumption. Now, I know that sounds kind of fancy. I don't mean it to, but it's just to move off of something you suppose. The word suppose means to presume that something is the case based on preferable evidence or probability without proof or certain knowledge. So I suppose this is the time to do it, so we'll do it. And when you do that, if God hasn't said it's the time, man, you can end up in a mess. That's unnecessary. So let me read from Acts 27 real quick, starting at verse 9. When much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than things spoken by Paul. Because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised set sail from there also, if by any means they could reach Phoenix. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing they had obtained their desire, they put out to sea and they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, a tempestuous headwind called a Euroclydon, or a hurricane, or a northeaster, came down upon them. Supposing they obtained their desire. They saw a soft little gentle south wind, and they supposed that this was the time to move, and they struck out. And as soon as they struck out, not long after, this headwind, this hurricane, this storm of a lifetime fell down on top of them. Now, the right thing for this ship's captain to do was to go towards Rome, because that was his destination. But this wasn't the time to do it. He moved off of a supposition. That they supposed, because the south wind blew softly just for a little bit, they said, oh, that's it. Now let's move. Everything looks like it's in order. Let's move. And they moved and run headlong into an unnecessary storm. The autumn and the winter storms in the Mediterranean Sea don't offer safe passage, and they should have stayed at Fair Havens or one of those ports there. They should have stayed there and throughout the winter, and they could have avoided this storm. Now, for God's will to be perfected in your life, you've got to obey His directions, even when something else may sound better or look better, or even is advisable by the knowledge of man. Just because it looks better or looks the time, you better obey God and not go by what you suppose. Just because everything looks like it fits together doesn't mean that that's the path that God has chosen for us. It is absolutely possible to make bad choices on appearance and on preferable evidence and miss the plan of God and put yourself in the middle of an unnecessary storm. And that happens in so many different situations in life. If you consider relationships, just because a person looks perfect doesn't mean they are. And it sure doesn't mean that you should marry them. I mean, they may be fine and all that, but hey, you don't know what all kind of crazy is going on in the inside. And you need to have a word from God. It doesn't just need to look like it fits. You need to know that God has said this is it. There have been many people over the years that formed relationships because people said it looks perfect, or it looks just right, or everything is just as it should be. And because God didn't approve of that, they went ahead and did it anyway, and off of a supposition, and because they didn't have the validation from God, it ended up being a mess. Finances are the same way. 0% interest doesn't necessarily mean it's time to buy a new car, does it? You need to make sure you can make the payment. You could end up in an unnecessary storm because you suppose that this was the right time. Careers are the same way. Just because the job pays more doesn't mean you need to go there. You need to know that God has said this is it. Do not suppose anything and move on that. Ministry is the same way. Just because you have certain skills and traits doesn't necessarily mean that you're called into a particular ministry. You cannot move, you cannot live, you cannot make these kind of decisions off of supposing. You can end up in an unnecessary storm. I've done it. Other people have done it. And it's time for us to stop moving off of supposition and presumption and move off of what we know the Spirit of God has told us. And that's how we avoid unnecessary dilemmas and storms in life. Well, hey, I've got to get out of here. It's been good being with you today. I look forward to being with you tomorrow on Friday's edition of Take 5. Till then, God bless you. Have a great day. Remember, friend, trust the Lord. He will never fail you.